Good morning, everybody. We'll start. Welcome to day 2 of the First World Summit on Leaving No One Behind. I'd like to just, first of all, fill you in on the awards from yesterday evening for anyone who wasn't at the gala dinner, to let you know that we did have a winner, and he's sitting here today. So actually, maybe Shervin Hashemi, would you like to just come up and show yourself this morning? And so Shervin Hashemi from Seoul University. We just like you to come up so we have a photograph. Come here. And so Shervin presented a nature-based solution for treating sanitation waste using biological treatment to produce water and fertilizer. And he has a pilot project in Vietnam that he's going to be starting on. So come over here.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Okay, sure. Yes, sure. Thank
you. It's important to say that all the projects we presented yesterday were really interesting, as they demonstrated different approaches to challenges in water and sanitation, and we'd also like to encourage all of the finalists to stay in touch with Waterlex from yesterday and today, as we'd like to showcase your ideas throughout the year and support your programs technically however we can. So what we were looking for in the award yesterday, which applies to today as well, was we were looking for innovation, we were looking for accessibility, affordability, and scalability. And we wanted it to address the criteria of human rights to water and sanitation. And in the case of the winning project yesterday, it was for sanitation, but it could be for water, for hygiene. But we want it to work for people in water-stressed areas or remote locations, or for marginalized people that maybe aren't connected to central water supplies. So yesterday as well, I thought the project was interesting because it went beyond using new technology. They particularly looked for local products and services, and they were providing a system that relied on local indigenous wisdom and thinking, which was nice. So we'll be partnering with his team over the next year to support them and showcasing their progress through World Water Day, World Water Week, World Toilet Day, and we'd also like to show the results next year at the next World Summit on Leaving No One Behind. So if I can go back to the reasons why we organise this summit. I mentioned it yesterday, but it's to create momentum, to find solutions for water and sanitation for the people that are being left behind. We only have 10 years or so left to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, and it's not going to happen without a concerted effort to think outside the box and find solutions for all. Before I go too far, actually, we have a little video that I wanted to show you. We tried to show it to you yesterday, and we had problems with the sound, and it is so beautiful. It's only a minute. Let me show it to you again. So we believe it requires more than resources and technology, but a human rights-based approach to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Through the summit, we're creating a platform for new ideas and support to find solutions for the very poor, the remote and the marginalised people in our communities. So we'd like to make this summit an annual event, and next year in 2020, the UN Water theme will be on climate change. So we hope to make the Second World Summit on leaving no one behind with respect to climate change. Climate change can lead to suffering for people in remote locations where there's water scarcity, flooding, or potentially salination of water supplies. That way, the way that people are able to manage water resources can help to mitigate the effects of climate change and improve the availability and quality of water available. We expect that nature-based solutions, water resource management and environmental considerations are an important part of the solutions. However, in order to support these mitigations and adaptations, there needs to be a collective and participative approach, and learnings need to be captured in legal and policy frameworks to create sustainability and scalability. So please let us know if you'd like to be involved in any way for the organisation of the Second World Summit on Leaving No One Behind. The work is starting now, and we're inviting other countries and sponsors to join us in this important event and to help us realise access to safe and sustainable water and sanitation for all. Calls for partnership will be going out this week, and I invite you to contact us directly if you're interested in being in from the start. So back to today. We have a full schedule with 5 sessions on different themes featuring marginalised people in different situations. The format will be a little different from yesterday as we're featuring the exploratory projects, which are new ideas which haven't been piloted yet. 2 or 3 projects are being presented in each session on the themes of women, Indigenous people, refugees and migrants, youth, climate change and rural areas. There are 3 awards, and these will be selected by the Summit Scientific Committee as yesterday, and the announcements will be made at the end of the day in the closing ceremony, starting just after 3 o'clock. So please sit back and enjoy the presentations today. We hope that they will inspire you to think of new and innovative ideas yourself, and that we may have even more ideas to share next year. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Amanda. If I can ask the judges to take their seats, and while they're doing that, if I could just let everyone know there are headphones on the table in front of you. If you'd like to listen to the presentation in French, there are headphones. If you select channel 2, you can hear the presentations in French. So this morning our judges are Dirk Hanschel, Professor Martin Luther, University Halle; Murray Burt, Head of Global Water and Sanitation, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees; Raya Stefan, International Water Resources Association; and our moderator for this session, Theme on Women, is Leisha Whitmer.
It's actually working. Good morning, everybody. My name is Leisha. I'm a steering committee member of the Women for Water Partnership, which is a global organization of women's organizations. So our members are women's organizations. What they have in common is that they are women, and what they have in common is that they work on water. But that can be very, very different depending on where they are. So it goes from local drinking water supply, building toilets, irrigation, transboundary issues, pollution, climate change adaptation. So basically, they cover the whole SDG 6 cycle. And they try to support each other with that. So some of them are very highly educated women. Some of them live in very, very rural areas where the only way you can get there is on the back of a motorcycle with no internet connection and everything in between. Our common language is English, but they speak 50 languages. So what we try to do is make it clear, first of all, that there is a difference between gender mainstreaming and women's participation. It's really not the same thing. And I think the strong feature of this conference is that it's looking at the personal angle, so the people who are doing things, and not so much in trying to reinvent the policy again. We have loads of policies, we have wonderful resolutions, but of course the big trick is how do you translate that on the ground? And I think that's exactly what this summit is trying to do, give you ideas on how to implement it on the ground. And then I start with criticism. I have a panel with 2 male and 1 female. I have a group of judges with 2 males and 1 female. So the next trick, my dear Amanda, is to get a better gender balance. And I know that's difficult, but still. So to get us started, just to wrap your head around it a little bit. If we talk about women's involvement in water, there are 3 sides to the coin. One is, yes, this is what you see in the media. They are the victims most of the time. Whether that is because they lack the facilities or whether they have a bad impact on their health, but they're seen as the victim. And this is what you see most of the time in communication. The second part is that they are actors. A lot of them do act, find their own solutions, and try and change the situation they're living in. Now you could call them victims, but only in a very limited sense. Being that most of the time, if they try to get help, assistance, expertise, finance, it passes them by. And just to put one statistic in your head, of all the ODA in the world, only 1% goes directly to women's activities. Makes you cry, right? Because everybody says women are the actors. The third one is the round of the coin. That's the voice. If you don't have enough voice, enough say, you are in the decision-making chair, then it's very difficult to get the right solutions for the situation that you are in. So all 3 elements are of importance, and I hope our panelists will bring out all 3, or at least one of them. So to get us started, could I invite the 3 panelists for our session? Alain, Deepti, and Tambo to come to the stage, please. And Alain will be kicking us off. You can stay there, yeah. And Deepti and Tambo, please take a chair. Alain, like a lot of the water people, is a traveler. So he has 2 bases, one in Stockholm and one in Paris. He's going to present in English, although his background is French. He's an engineer, and he spends part of his time as an inventor, designer, and part of his time as running a small company that specializes in solutions for water. So I'm inviting you to present your intriguing story about fog collection.
Thank you,
Please go
Leisha. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure and honor to be between you and to be able to present my work to you. Yes, water and women. We come and we have the milk from the breast of our ladies, and we find out later that it's always the women and even the little girls who run around to bring some water to the family. So that's why I classified my work as for women. Fog harvesting is a very natural old phenomenon, and it's for thousands of years. Many people did lots of work. In fact, my work is simply how to increase the capacity of collecting the water and at the same time using the same device, not only for collecting water from the fog, but also from the rain, because the alveol presentation of the netting arrangement makes it more attractive to the fog, and it keeps the fog within the alveol for a longer time under a little bit of high pressure, and instead of having the fog goes on a normal net in front of the coming wind with fog. And that means increasing a little bit of the pressure will increase the condensation capacity. The system here, it's a system which could be manufactured at any number and could be sent whether in a container, in a containerized system, or just a ready-to-make system. On the other hand, the same idea could be made by simple scaffoldings with big rolls of nettings, and these nettings will do the same job. So we could have a depth of from 1-2 meters to 100 meters if we want, and the height we can make it as much as we can. One of the other things is that because of the surface area on the plan view, we can also collect water when there is some water from the rain. The structure itself is capable of having solar system, it's capable of having wind, and it is also a possibility of having a refuge behind this structure for the workers or the people who are living in this area. What I did also is that I found out that if I spray some nano particles from rare metal oxides, which is, has nothing to do with health, it's, in fact, we use it and we can swallow it, is that we can increase the capillarity of the water drops when they hit the net. And because we have a triangular shape, when the air comes in, at the end it doesn't go out like what we have when we have just a simple net. In fact, it will come into a triangle, and this triangle at a certain time will slowly also fed as pressure feds, and there's also an extra collection. As far as I have found, and I've done a small test in the Aude region in the southwest of France. Unfortunately, at that time, all the picture went in a computer crash, and I didn't have the chance to show it, but I found out that for the same square meter, I have over 600% more collection for the same condition in the same area. As you can see here, all this could be in a containerized system, so that a container comes in, the parts of the container will be a supportive structure for solar panels or for wind turbines, of course, with all the logistic of having batteries or whatever. This is when they are all in lower set, and on the left you see that when we telescope the system up and we increase the area of capturing the wind. Again, this is 2-stage and 3-stage. And by the way, one of the other interesting things about this system is that we don't need to use concrete in installing this place. So if we have a roundy area or slope or whatever, we can always just use a simple screw anchors and fit the system on them, and the screw anchors can very easily done by 2 people. So there is no concrete mixing, no waiting for the concrete to cure for 28 days, and it could take any wind, because at the end of the triangles, as you can see, we have some openings, and these openings normally they have some rubber flaps, which I didn't show here, and these rubber flaps, whenever the wind comes higher, they simply release a little bit. So it's an aerodynamic way of not putting too much pressure on the netting. As you can see on the top of the structure, we can very easily install any renewable energy devices, and this will be easily taken by the structure itself. This is just to show the sliding action of the three parts. Of course, we can have them up to 5 or 6 parts or whatever, and whatever length we want. And all of them, they could be put together. In fact, so we only deploy them in a very easy way when we get on the site. Again, my triangulation. And this is a plan view of the system. By the way, this is a nice, easy, simple mechanical system which could be containerized, but we can also use without any mechanical system. Just the scaffolding, an easy scaffolding, and we can run meters and meters of nets, of polyethylene nets or polypropylene nets. And I am already working, but it's not here, I'm working on using ionization to try to ionize the molecules of the water so that I can capture more water. So here I'm increasing a little bit the pressure in the chamber of the entrance for the air. I am increasing the capillarity by using the nano coating. And this nano coating, by the way, it's a live nano coating unless somebody rubs the net, which normally nobody does, I suppose. So they are there and they are active. And one very interesting thing about this nano product is that when the sunshine comes in, with the activation, we get hydroxiles. And hydroxiles, they are very good disinfectant for air. So, but I suppose if you are in the nature, normally the air is not that bad, but it does do this. I've mentioned here that at least I obtained 600, but I suppose if I increase the length for the same frontal area, I could get much more percentage of it because it's much more surface. Yeah, it can be containerized and it can be used in any topography for any surface area. So it's really a very easy fix. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alain. And you have to write down or remember your questions because we'll take the questions after the third speaker. My friend Deepti. Deepti is a professor in environmental science at the University of Colombo in Sri Lanka. And I think I should mention, Deepti, that you're also one of the board members of an organization called Netwater, which exists of mainly very highly educated women in Sri Lanka that have highly qualified jobs, but in their spare time do all kinds of projects related to water for the women on the island of Sri Lanka. And she's going to present something which is, I think, a good feature in Sri Lanka on rainwater harvesting. Deepti, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning and Ayubowan. I'm from Sri Lanka, a tiny island in the tip of India in the Indian Ocean. My project is on rainwater harvesting as an alternative water source for CKDO affected areas of Sri Lanka, and I work for the University of Colombo, at the same time Women for Water and Sri Lanka Water Partnership in my leisure time, as Leisha mentioned, in Sri Lanka. Next slide, please. I'm going to tell you about a very sad story, a silent killer, a water pollution problem. Now, many people in some parts of Sri Lanka have been deprived of their rights to access clean drinking water. So how are we going to reach the goal 6, is it to have water and sanitation for all? As you can see from this slide, this is a problem which is related to health due to lack of clean drinking water. This problem persists in agricultural areas of the country because there have been many years, many decades of misusing and overusing of agrochemicals, especially the pesticides. Because of that, the groundwater and surface water of these areas are contaminated with agrochemicals, organic pollutants, especially the heavy metals. You can see from this diagram, when people drink this polluted water, polluted from agrochemicals and pesticides, which are being accumulated in surface and groundwater. So they get into their bodies, affect kidneys, and impair the kidney function. As a result, there are many deaths, more than 1,000 deaths in the country in the recent past, and more than 35,000 patients have been identified due to this chronic kidney disease of unknown etiology. Unknown etiology means in other diseases, the health experts know what the causes are, but in this case, they just suspect it could be the heavy metals, it could be the cyanobacterial toxins in the water, but they are for sure know that it comes from water, as the World Health Organization says. You can see from these slides, people are spraying pesticides even without adequate protective clothing and measures. And in the upper top picture, you can see a doctor treating a patient. So most of the time, it's the men, because there's a gender issue, the men get affected. But it's not the men, I'm talking about the women, because they do not have access to clean drinking water. Women have to go to fetch water from very far, because most of the village tanks and the dug wells are contaminated with this water. So it's the duty of the women to go somewhere else and to get water. And mostly the females are having the burden of fetching water, getting the clean water for their drinking and preparation of food. At the same time, when they are the breadwinner, basically the men in the households get affected and sometimes they die. The women have the extra burden of looking after the family. So we have witnessed this in many villages and many parts of these agricultural areas, because this problem persists in agricultural areas. That's why the scientists and the policymakers believe that this has linked to water for sure and some agricultural problem. So what I suggest and propose is to use rainwater harvesting to provide a solution. Rainwater harvesting, which gets the water from the rain. Sri Lanka is a tropical country. More than 8 months of the year we have rain. And to store this rainwater from your roof to the gutter, which is then connected to a huge tank, which provides you with clean water, free of charge, and it's green water. I mean, no environmental hazard is associated with fetching green water. I am proposing this because to ensure health and dignity to all of the people in the area, especially women and girl children. As you can see from the dug well, over here there are women who are lined up with pots to carry water to their respective households. I'm proposing to provide this rainwater harvesting solution in the north-central province of the country, which is indicated in dark. The specific area is named Kurunegala. You can see a boy is in a tank. So these are the tanks there where people get water from. So you can see these tanks are connected to the agricultural system, the paddy fields. People bathe there, people get some water there for drinking, which are being polluted for so many decades with agrochemicals and cyanobacteria. So the activities I suggest is to build and donate 35 rainwater harvesting tanks, focusing on schools, hospitals, and highly needed individuals. Now, some special features of this project. There are 3 basic activities that I propose. One is to initiate rainwater harvesting societies and to make them aware how not to misuse agrochemicals, how to conserve their water resources, maybe a dug well or maybe a village tank throughout the entire area, because the societies we are going to initiate in the different levels. So I would like to propose the monitoring program is participatory, because as you can see from the diagrams, it is not just one person, it is a collective measure or a collective action of all stakeholders, including the government agent, the communities, and the societies. So I wish to form these societies in these 3 geographic areas in Kurunegala district, so that we make the participant aware how to use these rainwater harvesting tanks, how to clean. Actually, they don't need much cleaning. The first thing that they have to do, just discard the first rain, because it might carry some dust. So after that, the tank is ready to use. So as I have indicated, there are some tanks at the moment are being used in certain schools. In the top photo, you can see some of our members, they have donated a tank, and these are the kind of activities that I propose, because it's a collective effort or a participatory effort of all stakeholders, leaving no one behind at the management level. So there are the members of the community, members of the society, representatives from the government, representatives from the research community. And to scale up, actually, I propose to change the attitudes of the communities, and they should be willing to change their practices of malpractices of using pesticides and agrochemicals, malpractices of polluting the common water bodies, and secondly, awareness raising how to conserve water sources and how to cultivate good practices of water conservation. My special focus is on school children as the conservation messengers, because I have a special program focusing on the youth as well as the school children, how not to pollute the water and how to make how to use this nature's gift, the rainwater, to solve their problem. And at the same time, increase stakeholder participation. And I'm going to, this would be a pilot project, so I'm going to look for innovative solutions. I mean, to develop this rainwater harvesting cascades or system further with the participation of the village communities and the scientists, as well as the government medical officer, the school principal, the government agent in the area, to have a more sustainable system in the future, because we want to include everybody. We don't want to leave anyone behind with deprived deprived rights and having no access to clean and safe water to drink. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deepti. And the last of the 3, all the way from Zambia. Evan Stembo is a researcher and an engineer. And he is also a lecturer in his daily occupation. And he's going to talk to us about fluoride issues in drinking water. Evans, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I come here to present a project on community-based monitoring and advocacy for fluoride contamination in drinking water in Luangwa district in Zambia, which is a rural district. What is the problem? The problem at hand is that 150 kilometers away from Lusaka, the capital, we have a district called Luangwa. In this district, high concentration of fluoride has resulted into increased cases of dental fluorosis. And this poses, or it endangers the human rights which the communities have to access to clean and safe water, which is even enshrined in the Zambian constitution. As you can see in the pictures, those are the children, pictures that were gotten from the same district. For this reason, we plan to determine the prevalence rate of dental fluorosis, after which we would like to quantify how much of fluoride exceeds the WHO limit, which is normally 1.5 milligrams per liter. This then will be followed by empowerment of communities, especially women and girls, in ways in which they can demand for their rights to access to safe and sustainable water. As you can see, in case you may not be very much sure where Zambia is, that's map of Africa. And then we have Zambia, and then the district that we are talking about is the one which is right down there, which has a total population of 29,000, almost 50% male, 50% female. But again, from the age range, you will see that from 0 to 19, that's the major population that lives there. Most of them being male, female, they are almost the same range. But you can see also that those that are 60 years old and above, the numbers are actually very minimal. So it's the ones from 0 to about 59 years who are affected. Why are we bringing the dimension of the women? Women, for men it's very easy. They can migrate to the city, to Lusaka, but for the women, they have to be there and take care of the children. And then also, these children that we're talking about, who have this dental fluorosis problem, they also abscond school because sometimes they are sick and they would not manage to go to school. The mothers have to attend to them using the only source of drinking water which they have, which is groundwater with a lot of fluoride. What activities have we lined up to solve this problem? 3 information is on this slide. We have the timeline from month 1 up to month 6. We have the budget for each activity, and we also have the activities. The first activity, we want to establish the prevalence rate of dental fluorosis in conjunction with the Ministry of Health, because we have developed this project in collaboration with the Ministry of Health office in that district. This will be followed by community empowerment and trainings in fluorosis sampling, analysis, and interpretation based on the public health aspect. After that, then, us together with the Ministry of Health and the local community representatives will go in the field and collect water samples. Then we shall do on-site testings with communities who are by that time empowered with the knowledge of how to do it. Then this will be followed by sensitizations in communities and schools together with the communities. We are not going there to do it for the communities. We want to do it with them so that even when we are not there, they can go further and demand for their rights to access to safe and adequate drinking water. Then after that, then we also plan to formulate a community-based policy brief, which will initiate community interface meetings with policymakers locally, as well as at regional level with the Member of Parliament and other civic leaders in that district. Then the other component that you see there is human resource and marketing aspect was more on the budget part. The total budget for our project is 11,500, and we hope to raise, we are looking for 10,000, and we hope to raise 1,500 locally. In terms of the results, the anticipated results of this project, we have 4 objectives. The first one being investigating the prevalence rate of dental fluorosis, and then we have verifiable indicators that will be used, but the outcome of this is that we will know the prevalence rate of dental fluorosis in that community because there is no data, there is no literature, and this will be used for policy dialogue with the policymakers. Second, the quantity of concentration that is present of fluoride that is present, because this one again, it's just scantily reported. There is no systematic data of how much of it is there, though evidence is there that indeed the contaminations are much more higher. In terms of the output for this, communities will be aware of the quality of drinking water in Luangwa district and other stakeholders. Third, we want to empower communities with necessary dental fluorosis preventive measures. And I have a list of verifiable indicators in the middle. But this will lead to improved public health of the communities, especially women and girls. The last objective is enhancing citizen participation in demanding for improved water quality. Water quality has received less attention, even at very global platforms. So locally, communities, they don't even know that this dental fluorosis comes about because of the high levels of fluoride. They associate it with something else. So once we empower them with this necessary knowledge and skills, then they will be more well informed and they will participate actively in local decisions that has to do with access to safe drinking water. In terms of scaling up, we hope to continue the water quality surveillance as well as community empowerment dialogues in other wards or other villages within the district, and as well as designing and installing a fluoride removal pilot based on locally available materials. And this will be done after the pilot will be done 6 months later. Then 1.5 years later will be used for scaling up and installation of the fluoride removal. And our focus, we are passionate about the schools because it's these pupils that you saw in the pictures who are suffering mostly with dental fluorosis. As you can see in the picture, this is the experience that our organization has. We have already implemented a similar project in Lusaka, which is struggling with nitrate contamination of groundwater. We went stage by stage. We have done the quantification of how much nitrate stage by stage. And as I speak now, we are piloting a nitrate removal unit, which has been fabricated with local materials based on biological nitrification. Thank you very much. End of my presentation.
Okay, I'll give the floor to the judges first, and of course, ladies first. And can you make sure that you point to who you want to answer?
I have questions for all the presenters, so how do we work? Just throw the questions.
Throw them out there.
Okay, so my first question to the first presenter. So I'm not a technical person, I'm a lawyer, so I might have missed some technical details in the device you have designed. I didn't get if your device is for individual households or is it for communities, or it can perhaps work for both. And I didn't get where is the water that you collect, where is it stored? if it's stored in the device itself or not. And I didn't understand if the renewable energy, is it something that you have, let's say, it's a second issue, or is it used for the device itself or to collect the water? This is my question. Then I have question.
Shall I answer you? So that
I go on with my question?
Yes, then the other two can think.
Okay, then for Deepti, I had questions. Yes, on your societies, I like very much the ideas of having a society manage this rainwater harvesting device, but I didn't understand if they are, because you mentioned that you have rainwater harvesting devices for hospitals, schools, and individuals. So are these societies will also manage the individual rainwater, and how will this work to manage at the individual level? And my last question for Evans. I saw the steps in your project, how you want to reach what you want to reach, but I didn't understand that in one of your slides you said that you want to empower the communities with preventive measures against this contamination by fluoride. So I didn't understand how, and before you have these units to remove fluoride from water, do you have other water resources available for the population or not?
Okay, thank you very much. Alain, you had time to think.
I'll use yours. Thank you for your question. The system could be used for anywhere, for any place, and for any size. In fact, the system doesn't need power to work on. The water is always collected at the bottom. So we have some kind of a bash, which is like a piece of PVC, whatever, then connected. And of course, we always have either an existing channel to throw the water in or some tanks. When I spoke about renewable energy to be used, it's simply to use this structure in case the community needs some power, because it's already a base for attaching solar panels or putting small wind turbines.
Yeah, answering to your question. Actually, what I'm proposing is to have to divide the area into 3 sub-areas, and to each area, I'm going to have to initiate a rainwater harvesting society, which includes, because I'm planning to donate these tanks to the hospital, to 1 or 2 religious places, and certain schools, and very needy individuals. So representative from each category would be the members of the societies, and we as the NGO workers and researchers periodically visit there to see whether the society is functioning, and we are very happy to help them to incorporate, to extend our help to get it going.
Thank you. On empowering the communities, basically during dental fluorosis, there will be an aspect of trying to understand the underpinning causes according to the lay perspective, understanding the community perspective. Then the findings from there will be used to train the communities using participatory rural appraisal methods, so that everyone participates. We move them from one stage to another until they get to understand on what can be done on dental fluorosis through improved water quality. Do we have other sources of drinking water? No. This is a rural village which just depends entirely on this groundwater, and there is no any other source. And also the impact of climate change is leading to increased droughts. So even rainwater could be an issue. They only depend on groundwater.
I believe this is going. Yep, fantastic. Great presentations. Thank you very much, all 3 presenters. I've got some questions for each of you, so I'll go through in the order you presented. So fog harvesting, I think, is a very interesting technology. I've been familiar with that for some time and actually installed a pilot in the mountains in eastern Congo. One of the issues that I've found with fog harvesting is the volume of water that you actually collect sometimes is not enough to make it a viable source for an individual household or community. So I'm interested about what types of volumes do you expect? I know there's a lot of changes to do with climatic conditions, but typical volumes. And this also relates to scalability of how scalable is this technology, do you think, realistically? What types of communities would it be appropriate for? And do you think that you'd be able to collect enough water to make it viable? So that's the question for fog harvesting. Also, one other on fog harvesting, which relates to scalability, is the cost. What sort of unit cost are we looking at? For rainwater harvesting in Sri Lanka, I think rainwater harvesting is a fantastic technology. I come from New Zealand, where almost all of the rural communities survive purely on rainwater. And one of the big issues there is storage volume. How much water do you need to store so that you can get through the dry season or the drier parts of the year in order to make it a viable resource? So I'm just wondering if you've looked into that, and particularly when you're looking at schools and so on, also households, what size volume of tank do you need? And then in terms of the tank itself, in your picture you showed a tank with a plastic polyethylene material. I know in Sri Lanka a lot of work's been done on ferrocement tanks. And I think ferrocement is interesting because it is a type of technology that a community can adopt and quickly build tanks themselves. So I'm just wondering what you've thought about the tank materials and also the operations and maintenance of the tanks. On the fluoride in Zambia, I know fluoride and fluorosis is a major problem throughout all of Rift Valley in Africa, and I've been involved in high fluoride levels in refugee camps up in Kakuma in Kenya. And one of the things I didn't see coming out in your presentation is what I know about fluoride contamination is that it varies seasonally over the year due to dilution. So at one point in time, you may be above the World Health Standard in your testing, but then during another part of the season, you could be below the World Health, and it's variable. So I'm just wondering how you're building that into your testing. And also the sources of fluoride. Fluorosis doesn't necessarily always come from the drinking water. There could be other sources within the food chain where it's coming in, so whether you're looking at that. And then I noticed that your presentation was very much focused on the testing, but you didn't have so much on the treatment side. I actually think the treatment is the more important side, so just maybe you can develop that a bit more. Thanks. Sorry, there's a lot in there.
Thank you. Hello. When it comes to feasibility, as you know, first of all, for any project, we have to make sure that there is fog to start with. So this is one. Secondly, the scaffolding, or any other system, is in fact the cheapest structural available system. For the netting I used, it's about 1.5 to 2 euros per square meter, which makes it very, very interesting. Now, the system which I had presented, it could, in a normal foggy place, it could give you about 7 to 12 cubic meter, which is very interesting compared to a very long vertical net. So yes, we have to think about feasibility, but we have to think about the value of a human. First of all, I believe it's extremely, extremely cost effective. And secondly, definitely, even if it's thought as a commercial issue, it is still very viable. Thank you.
Answering my question, actually, rainwater harvesting depends on certain conditions. The first condition is the availability of rain in this area. Basically, in many parts of Sri Lanka, we have a lot of rain, maybe 6-7 months raining, or 2-3 very dry months, and again 2 intermediate months. So people need to collect rainwater during the rainy season. Again, the other condition is the surface of water collection. So if it's a school or a hospital or a government building, it's huge, and the water is collected to a gutter. From the gutter, it goes to the tank. But when it comes to individual families, if they have very small houses without permanent kind of roofing, you can't have it. That's why I'm suggesting, I'm proposing to have this in, especially in schools, the hospitals, and other community places. But at the same time, after a pilot survey, we can identify the places where people in the individual houses, but the condition is you have to have a permanent and solid roof. And then comes to cleaning and maintenance. Obviously, the first, the rain you should discard because it can carry dust and other particles. So after that, if your gutter is clean and there's a mesh and other certain safety precautions, you have to put those. That's why I'm forming these rainwater harvesting societies to educate people how to maintain and how to get a sustainable solution out of this tank. So I propose to inspect these tanks periodically with the Rainwater Harvesting Society members, like especially the government agent, maybe the doctor or the school principal or any representative of these institutes. Thank you.
The volume? How much would you think you need to collect?
The volume, for a small family, it would be maybe 2,000 to 300. 2,000 liters. But for a school or a government institute, there could be a series of such tanks in each building, then connects to a series of taps.
So if I understand you correctly, you would use multiple containers to collect the water?
Yes.
Not
Or
just
else,
one per building?
Yeah, as you suggested, it again depends on the material. Or if it's a plastic or polyvinyl material, it's readily available. These tanks are readily available. You can just go and purchase from whatever outlets. So that is the most convenient method. But if you want to have a huge tank built, again we can arrange, because there are the experts, the masons and the builders who are capable of building such tanks. But then again, you have to have a kind of a support. That is good for, I mean, the schools and other big institutes could have a series of small tanks, the plastic tanks, or maybe a big tank, connecting several roofs into that.
Thank you. Evan?
Thank you. In terms of seasonal variation, that's why in the pilot, during the pilot phase, which is 6 months, we actually opt to collect samples once every month, so that within 6 months we are going to have results which may help us with understanding those variations. And then in terms of other sources, this area is actually, part of this area is in the valley. And the scanty literature has already indicated higher levels of fluoride in those areas where there's high dental fluorosis prevalence rates. Then treatment side, first of all, we hope to quantify the problem, to know how many people are affected in these given wards. After that, how much of the fluoride exceeds the WHO limit. Then we engage with communities on what should be done on this issue, so that they can demand for their right to access to safe water based on the human rights AAQ framework, which was drafted by Danish Institute of Human Rights, which talks about accessibility, availability, affordability, and quality. Then after 6 months, that's when we will now go, once policymakers and community leaders have been engaged on this issue, and we have the buy-in by the politicians, by the donors, local donors, then we will embark on the designing and piloting of the treatment process. We envision that this pilot process, this design, will be based on adsorption process. Because we want to use charcoal locally, which can locally be found.
Okay, thank you, Evan. Dirk, we are slowly starting to run out of time.
Thank you. I'll be brief, and I apologize. I'm not an engineer, but a legal academic, so some of the very few and quick questions that I will ask may sound a bit basic. First of all, my first question goes to Alain Al-Hilali. I would like to know what is particularly new about the arrangement you were suggesting, and why has no one done this ever before?
As you can see, this arrangement is an easy fix to increase the surface area and to entrap the fog. And why nobody did it before? Just like any other work, there's always somebody that comes up with something. So I came up with this one because it's more efficient and it gives more value and it's a cheap cost.
Thank you very much. The second question goes to Vikrama Singh. In your application, you write that the exact cause of chronic kidney disease is not entirely clear, but there is a hypothesis that it could be caused by water, but it's not 100% proven. So it then makes a lot of sense to focus on water, I suppose, but what if it's not the water? So why are you focusing on water in particular, if there could be other causes as well?
I have the exact answer, sir. Actually, if you Google the CKDU in Sri Lanka or elsewhere, the World Health Organization says it's from water. But they have not, nobody has investigated, actually was successful in investigating the exact cause. Nobody knows, but WHO and the others say it's from water, and they don't know what is the mechanism or what the exact cause is. What they suggest is it could be the heavy metals, it could be persistent organic pollutants, and it could be cyanobacteria, but it's basically from water.
Thank you. And the last question, if I may, goes to Evans Tembo. It's coming back to the question of how to empower the community. You said that pertinent rights are also in the Constitution. So from a legal perspective, would that empowerment lead to some kind of judicial activity, or how likely is it that through more information the community can actually convince the local or more central decision makers to implement the rights more effectively?
Thank you. Through that community empowerment, which will involve participatory training, then, like I had mentioned, that we will organize for interface meetings with community leaders. From those interface community meetings, then we will have also high-level policy dialogue at community level, where we invite the member of parliament and other stakeholders, so that we can lobby and share and also use cases together with the communities and also affected people. From that point, then we see that we see hope. We see hope that those that represent them in the parliament could actually take this forward. But for us, it's a starting step. It's a stepping stone. We are hoping that this can actually, once we scale it up, we can actually make it bigger and the whole country can actually know about this. And we'll also do some media campaigns about the same on TV, on national TV.
Thank you, Timo.
Thank you.
Okay, the last few seconds. I can take 2 questions. There's a gentleman there in the middle with a, yes, you, yep.
Oh, okay. Very interesting presentations. Straight one clarification question to the presenter from Sri Lanka. You mentioned that the chemicalization of agriculture seemed to be causing water pollution, which is ultimately causing this strange disease. But the correlation between water harvesting that you are proposing and how is it really going to help in mitigating the health problem? And that part is not very clear. Given the uncertainty of information, whether it is really wise to go for water harvesting, rainwater harvesting, which is help in terms of groundwater recharging and also diluting certain mineral elements of the water. But to particularly solve this problem, address this particular health challenge, whether it would be really helpful, that's one thing. I think, and my second question to Zambia presenter.
Sir, one question.
Okay.
You posed it. Thank you. Over there.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah, thank you so much to the presenter. I will ask Mr. Elian about the water harvesting innovative solution or technology. Have you tested this technology and harvest water from the high humidity area, not from the fog area? This is the first. And the second thing, you mentioned ionization. You can use it. Have you used it? And if you use it, how much percentage you add to the water harvesting, I mean, from these areas? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Deepti, please.
Yeah. I think I have an answer for your question. Actually, the CKDU is directly related to water, as the WHO officials and the Sri Lankan health officials say. It comes with the drinking water, because other kidney diseases have a cause, maybe from diabetics, maybe from genetic factors, but this particular cause, which is spread in many parts of Sri Lanka, especially in agricultural areas, they have related it to the drinking water, because most of these drinking water sources are stagnated, they don't flow, they are either from the village tank or the dug wells. That means the surface and the groundwater are contaminated, either with the persistent organic pollutants, pesticides, heavy metals, or maybe from the cyanobacteria. So the best alternative is to provide water from any other alternative source. So this is that's why I propose the rainwater, which is free of all those chemicals. It could contain some minor particles, the dust, but again, you can, if you boil it, the impact would be fine. The health effect would not be there, because 100% they are out of or free of toxin chemicals, because rain is just something very with less polluted with toxins.
Okay. Alain?
Thank you for your question. The principle of fog collection is completely different than humidity, because fog, we do it at a certain situation where there's some cooling effect already existing in the area, and the fog condense. In a humidity, you could have a 40 degree, and you don't give a chance to the humidity to dissipate unless you have a cooler surface. So as we are not using any cooling effect by energy, we're just using the existing cooling atmospheric cooling effect, the fog will condense and we'll get the droplets. With the heat, it's not easy to, it's not possible to condense unless you have a cooling effect.
Okay,
I
thank
hope
you very
answered
much. I would ask you to give a big hand to our three presenters. And thank you very much. You are allowed to go back to your original seat. And I hand over to the MC to introduce the next panel.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, presenters. Thank you, judges. Our next moderator is Rio Hada from the UN Office of the High Commission.
Thank you very much, and good morning to you all. I'm Rio Hada from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. I'm responsible for a couple of things, including the human rights to water and sanitation, and it's my pleasure to be a part of the scientific committee and supporting this important summit. So without further ado, I'd like to start going to the next session, which is focusing on indigenous peoples. Like so many other human rights, indigenous people suffer disproportionate violations of their rights to safe drinking water and sanitation. When we talk about human rights-based approach to leave no one behind, the first question we ask is that who does not have access and why? And typically it is the marginalized, the poor, and those without a political voice. So it's not just in terms of physical access, but it's also about their capacity and the position in the society, and all these traditions and other factors that sort of discriminate them. So to address this situation is not just a matter of charity or goodwill. Under human rights law, the states are under obligations to take actions, remove discriminatory laws and practices, including them in decision-making process, and provide avenues for remedies. This is the core of a human rights-based approach. And UN human rights mechanisms receive numerous reports about the threat to indigenous rights, including especially concerns about pollution of water sources in the land that they live. I just want to give you a couple other examples, such as impact of mining operations, because they often live in resource-rich area. Indigenous peoples were seeing severe impacts on their access to clean water, as well as on their way of life and cultures. And indeed, the projects to generate new sources of energy, such as dams and geothermal exploration, have been reported as having a serious impact on access to clean water for indigenous peoples. And we have a presenter from Nigeria, and I'll be interested in hearing what the situation in his countries. So indigenous people also have a very special and even a spiritual relationship with water and land and natures. And indigenous and tribal peoples represent only 5% of the world populations, but according to some estimates, they care for more than 20% of the Earth's surface and protect nearly 80% of the biodiversity on the planet. So it is important that their rights and traditional knowledge is respected and protected. So this morning, in this session, we'll hear 3 presentations addressing the access to water for indigenous and local communities. And the structure is the same. We'll ask them in 5 minutes to present the problem, since these are exploratory projects, how they plan to address the challenges, especially from human rights-based approach, and what are the results expected, and how they see the potential for scaling up. So the first speaker that I'd like to invite is Dr. Kenneth Arrow. Oh, in fact, could all the speakers come to the stage and take their seats, please? Please take a seat. So first I'd like to invite Dr. Kenneth Arrow, who's a chief environmental scientist of the NOSTRA, this National Oil Spill Detection and Response Agency of Nigeria. And he will present the results from their study to determine the effect of the storage conditions and sunlight exposure on Sachet Nylon and blended water. I was told that we have about 10 minutes maximum for the presentation. So Dr. Aro, you have the floor.
Yeah. Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Kenneth Aro. I come from Nigeria. Nigeria is in West Africa, and I work with National OSP Detection and Response Agency. I am here to make a presentation on the effect of storage condition and sunlight on the quality of sachet nylon and vented water. This is one of the exploratory research proposals submitted to Waterlex as a part of the program to mark the first World Summit on Leaving No One Behind. I would like to commend Waterlex for this initiative. It is actually timely and coming at a time when countries, particularly developing countries all over the world, are actually having serious problems with respect to lack of access to potable water. And this is partly as a result of inability of various levels of government to take necessary steps and strong political will and commitment to be able to address this issue. So I would also say that water is one of the essential requirements of life and is also needed for life sustenance. And it is also very, very important for us to be discussing this matter because a human right of water actually entitles an individual to safe, human rights of water enables an individual to have safe water, sufficient water, to be able to have physically accessible water, and also have acceptable water and the ones that can also be affordable. Now, it is only when we have all these 5 components that an individual can actually raise his head high, that he's living in a very good health condition. But if any of these components is actually lacking, then we may be having problems because United Nations report have actually identified that about every 8 seconds, a child dies as a result of a lack of access to potable water. And then over 80% of sicknesses and diseases that are actually ravaging people in developing countries all over the world is as a result of polluted water, unavailability of water, and then poor sanitation. It is also on record that about 2.2 million deaths that are actually attributed to complications arising from diarrhea-related issues actually because of poor water quality. And it is very, very important for us to be discussing this because we wouldn't want a lot of people to be left behind in the global access to water and sanitation. Now, this particular research is actually designed to address the needs of indigenous communities and the rural communities that are actually at the forefront of having these issues. Now, in oil-bearing communities in Nigeria, which is one of the developing countries, we have seen that incessant attacks on oil facilities within the area has resulted to oil spillage, which, as you see from the slide there, is affecting both groundwater and then river water. You can see the slick from that slide that you're seeing there is about a millimeter thickness of crude oil that is on the other surface water. And then these traditional communities that we're talking about derive their potable water needs from some of these traditional sources of water. And then it is only when we look at the other options available for them, because since the groundwater is polluted, in a study that was commissioned by United Nations Environment Program, UNEP, in Nigeria in 2011, they have identified the presence of benzene up to 900 times the WHO limit, which is actually not very, very good for human consumption. Now, if we look at what we have there, we have seen that the other option left for these people would be either taking water from the rain or also taking water from sachet water, which is about 0.5 liters of water that is encased in a nylon and then sealed at both ends and then used as alternative for water. Now, in looking at other options, which is rainwater, because of the poor regulatory regime in Nigeria in terms of gas flaring, the oxides of sulfur also brings down some components of this water as acid rain, which is also not very good. So the only option left for them, in order for this community not to be driven into extinction, is for them to now resort to use of this sachet water that we're seeing here. Now, but the other problem we have here is that the water the sachet water are kept at various storage conditions. Some of them are kept in the rooms. Because of storage constraints, some of them are also left in the open with the direct sunlight, having an effect on them. So we are trying to find out the effect of storage condition on the quality of this water that is vended in this nylon. Now, we will be looking at activities that will enable us to achieve this. Now, the pilot study is going to be conducted in Nigeria, and then particularly in Port Harcourt, because we still have indigenous people and then also local communities that are there. Then in the same place too, we also have people that are displaced as a result of flooding and also natural disasters that also having children and women too there. Now, in looking at the method that we're going to use to achieve this, they will be divided into two models. One is experimental model, and then the other one is going to be a true survey. Now, on the experimental model, we're going to have a physiochemical analysis, which is going to look at chemical properties of this nylon, looking at the pore properties like porosity and the rest of them. Then we'll be looking, those samples will be exposed to room temperature, and then some of them will be exposed to sunlight. Now, we will be also looking at the second model, which is the bacteriological analysis. The bacteriological analysis will enable us to determine the total bacterial count and total heterotrophic bacterial count, which will be done weekly for 4 weeks, and then also fortnightly for 20 weeks. Now, if the result is okay, we will also be moving to the second model, which is the survey. The survey is actually going to introduce some components of human rights-based approach in generating our data, because we will make sure that the way in which the data is going to be generated will be done in such a way that nobody will be discriminated against, either on the course of your health, or because of your religious, or maybe your background. But there will be that total social inclusiveness in terms of generating data from this, and then that will enable us to have a structured questionnaire to mainstream gender in the whatever we are doing there. Now, on the issue of the result that we're going to get from this exercise, we'll be taking it to a mentor that is going to be working in the university within the area of this study. Then that will open up another collaboration between what we are doing on one hand, and then the industry and the institution on the other side. So if we're able to have what we are going to get from this as part of the result, and then the mentor now okays it from our discussion, it means that we will be now producing them in form of manuscript, which will be now used to make a progress report to our sponsors, and then to let them know the extent of which we have done. This will enable us to be making presentations, which will coming up in sometime in August during the Water Week. And then if what we are doing is acceptable by our mentors, then we will be talking of scaling it up, and then including country like Ghana, where we're also going to do the same kind of work on extended data gathering. Now, what is going to be the nature of our result? Our result is actually going to derive from the main objective of the study, which is going to give us the effect of a storage condition on the quality of sachet nylon, and then the various storage conditions will also be there. Now, some of the specific objectives that will be looked into will include the characterization of the sachet water nylon, then the various bacteriological loads that will be associated with the samples that we're going to analyze, and then also the survey component of it will give us information about health and safety. Now, what are the outcomes? The outcomes will actually give us information about the chemical properties of the nylon, and then increase in access to safe sachet water, and then the suitable storage condition, and also information about the perception of the people on what is going to be their take if they consume this product. Now, some of that output will also give us information about chemical properties, physical properties, and then also we will also be getting information from the bacteriological load, taking into consideration the world standards that is also set out to be able to compare them with what we are getting from the field. Now, the other information that is going to be part of the output will be the health, safety, and environment component of it when we do the survey. Now, what are the key performance indicators? The key performance indicators will enable us to look at the organics and then the pore size of the nylon, the porosity, and the rest of them. We'll also be looking at the total bacterial count, and then the various bacterial isolates that will come out from this process. Then the key performance indicators will also give us information about illnesses and diseases that will be derived from the established record books from either health post and the rest of them. Then we will also, means of verifying what we are doing will be through laboratory results that will be analyzed, and then we will also compare them with international standards. Now, if we are through with this, we will be thinking of scaling up this process, and then, as I said before, the scale-up process will enable us to have more data gathering, and which will involve Ghana, and then also the sample size will definitely increase. And there will be also increase in the population of coverage area because some of the structured questionnaires now will increase from the number that we initially have done in the pilot. And then also the budget will also increase because there will be additional costs on human resources, operational costs, and also for commercialization and then communication and marketing of this particular product. Now, what will be our policy outcome from this endeavor? It will give us information about possibility of getting more further objectives on what we are going to do. It will also give us an idea as whether we're going to take policy recommendation and the decision on what has actually happened to the sachet water product. And then again, it will also ultimately result in review of government regulations. And I'm very sure that if we're able to get this correct, it will give us information about the best method of storing this sachet water product in such a way as to guarantee the safety of the consumers. And by doing this way, we'll be moving a lot of people out from the issue of leaving them behind and then getting them to global players where they will contribute meaningfully to access to water and sanitation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aro. You may return to the seat, please, and thank you for your presentation. We'll move right into the next presenter, and as in the previous session, we will then give a chance for our judges to make some comments and questions, and then we will open to the floor. So the next speaker is Ms. Eva Manzano, and she represents the Center for Affordable Water and Sanitation Technology. This is a Canadian engineering firm which provides technical training and consulting in WASH for the poor in developing countries. And she will present her project to build an enabling environment for universal access to safe water in Colombia. So, please.
Thank you. Buenos días a todos. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity. Thank you. So what's the problem we're trying to solve here? I think that picture speaks for itself. I took that photo 2 years ago at a school diner in the peri-urban area of Ibagué, a city that is around 5 hours from Bogota, and that's the water people are using for kids drinking, cooking, and other hygiene practices. So the problem is obviously related to water quality. When we talk about the sector and all the progress that has been done over the last decades, not only in Colombia, but globally around water coverage, there has been huge progress. The problem is still when we talk about water quality. In Colombia in particular, the government has been thinking about this and how to really try to close that gap on not only getting coverage to those most vulnerable, including indigenous groups, women, children, Afro-Colombian, displaced population due to the violence in the country. They've not only been thinking about the coverage gap, but also trying to solve this problem of the lack of quality of the pipe systems, but also when there are no pipe systems, what could be the options. They have developed a policy trying to identify alternative solutions, like household water treatment, that could be potentially implemented in these areas that are normally lived by vulnerable populations to try to solve the problem of water quality. So the problem is that policies on their own don't solve the problem. We need to put them into practice. And that's what we want to offer here, a solution to put that policy into practice in Colombia. So how does it work? What we are proposing as COS is helping the government to build their internal capacity on what could be these alternative solutions for water treatment to improve water quality, and put them and bring them to these communities through training and transferring that knowledge in cascade to the department and municipal levels. So by that approach, we will be solving the problem of water quality, but also we will be aiming to approach the acceptability problem, because what we're proposing are low-cost solutions that normally use local and ancestral methods like using plants for sedimenting water, or boiling, or local and simple, that use local and simple materials that are more acceptable by these type of populations, and also improve organoleptic characteristic of water, so that also increase the acceptability of these solutions. And in addition, these solutions are more affordable. They're locally available, low cost, easy to implement, so therefore it will mitigate that problem of bringing big infrastructure that is costly and not always available when we're talking about remote and dispersed communities. In terms of the activities we're proposing, the first one, as I mentioned, is working in building the capacity of the government in what are these alternative solutions that they have regulated, what are they, but not only what are they and how they work, also how to implement them successfully. Because at the end of the day, what we want is people having and drinking, safe drinking water, not just having a filter at the shelf or at the corner in a kitchen without using it. In addition to that, we recognize that in countries like Colombia, that is a huge country, it's hard to get to every single corner. So we will be making sure that the training materials are, first of all, contextualized to the different parts of the country, and also available online and offline for people to get access to that information without needing to be physically at the training. And at the same time, we will be working with a competency validation process in this process of training and building capacity of municipal people and communities to make sure that we give that voice to like women and indigenous people that normally they're not respected because of who they are. So by helping them to build their technical capacity, they will have that voice to be more supported. We also recognize that only working with the government has some risk because it might be a slow process. So we will make sure to keep supporting like local implementers in the country, like NGOs, foundations that are already working in the water sector, by helping them to increase and improve the quality of their implementation by providing technical guidance and support through their projects. And also, as I said, with that competency validation program. At the same time, women here can play a key role as they normally act as the community health promoters in the communities, so that will be another way of empowering them. Thirdly, we will play a role in strengthening the sector by organizing events like that one, like learning exchange, like where we can collect the best practices from the sector, from the actual implementation, and feedback to the government so they can include those best practices in the implementation of this new normative that they have put together, because we don't want them to be reinventing the wheel. Actually, that picture was from an event that we organized last year in Bogota with like ministries from 15 countries around the region last year, and we've already been seeing some fruits of that event because that influence or including these solutions is being brought also to other countries like Honduras, where in a couple of months we will have another event on influencing government on how to think about including alternative solutions into their strategies and national policies. And finally, we know that we as a Canadian organization, we don't know the local languages, like the local conditions as well as a local organization. So that's why we're working in building the capacity of a Colombian-based NGO called Fundación Red Proyecto Gente to make sure that they are the ones that are able to provide those services without us, to make it more sustainable as well. In terms of how we will be measuring our results, first of all, as we will be training the government, we would like to see what they're doing with all the knowledge and the skills they're getting. So we will be supporting them and serving them through to see how many people they're reaching. At the same time, we will be visiting all these projects because, as I mentioned, we want to make sure that they're good quality and that they're reaching people and making sure that there is a sustained behavior change. We're not just distributing technologies all over the place. And also, we will be training and going through the competency validation with technicians and community health promoters that we work with And we keep working beside our partners, Fundación Red Proyecto Gente, and we will monitoring how independent they are in terms of providing services. So that will be our measure that they're ready to work without us or step back. But then the big question is like, how are we gonna actually make sure that we reach the SDG 6.1 and we leave no one behind? That's why we are here. And for me, thinking about the work that I've been doing in Colombia and other countries in the region, what it really needs to happen is, to scale this up, is we need to build this enabling environment that helps to put this into place. And reflecting, I've been thinking, well, but how do you create that enabling environment? And to me, the key factors that need to be in place are, well, first of all, we need governments to be focusing on those gaps. Like, we can have the best statistics, the GMP numbers, but if we don't really focus on what those gaps are and try to look for solutions, it's very difficult that we really advance to the SDGs. And us as an NGO, our role is just like advocating them to focusing on those gaps and trying to reach those vulnerable populations. As I said, we need norms and policies, but those need to be practical enough to be put into place. In Colombia in particular, we developed this norm, but then they realized that water quality standards didn't necessarily match with what they put in the other law. So how do we match them together to make sure that we can actually put it in practice? We also need an intersectoral approach. In Colombia in particular, we're very closely working with the Ministry of Housing, responsible for water implementation, but also with the Ministry of Health, Agriculture, Education, because we are all part of the same problem and we need all work together towards the solution. The knowledge and skill needs to be at the right scale. It doesn't matter if we have great engineers sitting at an office in Bogota. We need them to be in the departments, in the communities, at local level, building the capacity of the communities for them to be able to take informed decisions and solve their own worst problems. We need committed and motivated people as well. And particularly sometimes within the government structure, it's harder when you've been in the same, or you don't have chances to grow professionally. Find that motivation sometimes might be hard, so we need to look for ways of keeping that motivation, and that's why that validation process into these technical roles might be a way of increasing that motivation. We need for local partnerships, as I mentioned. That's why we're partnering with the local NGO and with other organizations within the waste sector. And as for everything, we need resources. But in this case, when I mean resources, it's kind of a mindset, change of a mindset as well, because we don't need resources necessarily for infrastructure, because we're talking about low-cost technologies, but we need also resources for human resources, for investing in real producing, like a behavior change that is sustained in the communities. So that's where we also need to invest, not only, which is important as well, in building stuff and pipes, but also in making sure that we change behaviors at community level. And that was all. Thank you so much. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Ms. Manzono. It's for the very clear presentation that you are working with both the local governments as duty bearers, but also with the rights holders. Okay, our last presenter is Ms. Stephanie Keane from Rights and Resources Initiative, and she will present her project on community-based water tenure, which is a comparative legal analysis of indigenous and local communities' freshwater rights. So, Stephanie, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Stephanie Keane. I am a lawyer, and I lead the tenure tracking program at the Rights and Resources Initiative, or RRI. We are a strategic global coalition dedicated to advancing the land, forest, and natural resource rights of indigenous peoples, local communities, and indigenous and rural women. We focus exclusively on resource rights that are held at the community level, primarily in low and middle income countries. And since 2016, we've been working with the Environmental Law Institute to develop a comparative analytical framework tracking the extent to which national law recognizes the freshwater rights of Indigenous peoples and local communities. Our main collaborator at ELI is attorney Jessica Trowell, the director of ELI's International Water and Africa programs. Now, we're currently finalizing our 16-country analysis, and we will be publishing results in a report this summer. Our forthcoming analysis will be the 5th of RRI's tenure tracking data sets. Our 4 existing data sets cumulatively cover over 75 countries, and they track the strength and extent to which national law recognizes the resource rights of Indigenous peoples, local communities, and rural women. Now, these tenure tracking analyses are a core function of our organization that's existed since our founding. They're global studies, and they monitor progress over time with respect to the legal recognition of community resource rights. Up to 2.5 billion people worldwide use and rely on the world's community lands and resources. While Indigenous peoples and local communities have customary, collective, and sometimes informal rights to over 50% of the world's land, our tenure tracking data demonstrates that globally they only have legally recognized rights as landowners to 10%. So the territories used and claimed by communities are vast, but we know that legally recognized rights comprising secure freshwater tenure have yet to be conceptualized, widely accepted, analyzed, or tracked over time. Now, our study adopts a tenure-based approach to highlight the relationships between the many freshwater, land, and forest rights by which communities steward their territorial resources. And it's important to take a tenure-based approach to freshwater for 2 principal reasons. First, in practice, Indigenous and local communities use and govern aquatic and terrestrial resources in very interrelated manners. So we need to devise an approach that reflects communities' reality. Secondly, as our data demonstrates, most countries render communities' freshwater rights fundamentally dependent on the recognition of land rights. But despite these legal and practical realities, we know that communities' freshwater rights are commonly overlooked, even as the importance of community land tenure has become widely accepted. Unfortunately, when communities' freshwater rights are threatened, they are often either unaware of or unable to effectively assert the bundle of rights necessary to protect their human right to water and sanitation. So in this and many other respects, Indigenous peoples and local communities are being left behind. Our forthcoming analysis addresses these troubling realities by establishing a global baseline tracking the legal status of communities' freshwater rights. By tracking the status of rights on paper, our analysis can fuel data-driven advocacy, can equip communities with the information they need to protect their human right to water and sanitation, and can be used to measure the implementation gap between the law on paper and communities' lived daily reality. And this slide outlines our methodology. Our study's unit of analysis allows for a very nuanced assessment. This unit is a community-based water tenure regime, or CWTR. And essentially, this is a national level legal framework that allows communities to have recognized freshwater rights of use and at least either governance or exclusion. And CWTRs can pertain to Indigenous peoples, to specific ethnic groups, or to water user associations that are comprised of communities. And some countries don't recognize community level freshwater rights, but other countries have many CWTRs. And these are always comprised of a wide variety of national legislation, in addition to Supreme Court and Constitutional Court cases regulating both surface and groundwater. Our analysis covers 16 countries across Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Oceania, and we've identified a total of 39 community-based water tenure regimes. For each country analyzed, we have a threshold question determining whether national law recognizes the human right to water. We also have 3 threshold questions that are answered at the CWTR level, and those relate to customary rights to fresh water, whether freshwater rights are dependent on legally recognized land rights for communities, and whether the specific rights of Indigenous and rural women to use or govern fresh water are explicitly recognized. At the CWTR level, we also assess 13 legal entitlements that are captured by 5 indicators and associated sub-indicators. First, we determine whether communities have legally recognized rights to use fresh water for domestic, small-scale livelihood and cultural purposes. For all of the uses that we assess, we determine whether they are burdened by procedural requirements like permits or incorporation requirements that can hinder communities' accessibility and the affordability of fresh water. We also determine whether domestic uses are explicitly prioritized in the law and whether communities' rights are actually prioritized over those of other stakeholders. Excuse me. We also examine whether communities have legally recognized rights to use internal dispute resolution mechanisms to resolve disputes regarding fresh water. We look to see whether they can take their internal rules and enforce them against external third parties, and whether they can even exclude third parties from freshwater resources that they have legally recognized rights to. Under the Due Process and Compensation Indicator, we determine whether communities have recognized rights of prior notice, consultation, and appeal when their rights are threatened. And in the domestic context, we also look to see whether they have recognized rights of compensation if their rights are actually revoked. Now, our results are still preliminary, but today I'm happy to share the following key trends. First, most but not all countries have national laws recognizing the human right to water. Second, communities' freshwater rights are typically dependent on their legally recognized rights to land. So what this means is for many communities throughout the world, if there isn't a secure, legally recognized right to land, the human right to water and sanitation may be out of communities' reach. So we need to consider relationships between aquatic and terrestrial resources and to promote harmonization. Thirdly, procedural requirements, whether it be use requirements or incorporation requirements for freshwater governance, are really onerous. Most countries, most CWTRs do have recognized livelihood uses, but these are typically burdened by permit requirements that limit the duration of these rights, as well as communities' ability to lawfully use fresh water. So these trends need to be reversed alongside domestic use permit requirements. Fourthly, some of the rights most essential to communities' ability to protect their territorial waters are seldom recognized. Internal rulemaking and planning rights are typically recognized, but then this is undercut by communities' inability to use these internal rules and enforce them against external actors that threaten freshwater resources that they depend on for their very survival. Transboundary due process has also performed poorly. So we need to increase the recognition and realization of these rights, but at the same time, our analysis shows that there are several legal entitlements that are commonly legally recognized and that communities need support in actually enforcing. These include due process and compensation in the domestic context, exclusion rights, and internal dispute resolution rights. And last, but certainly not least, laws regulating community-based freshwater tenure are typically gender blind. Of the 4 threshold questions in our framework, the threshold question on women's rights receives the least protection. It's the poorest performer. And this is extremely problematic for a number of reasons. Firstly, I'll just say, gender-neutral laws aren't actually effective in terms of helping women to realize their resource rights. This is proven. So we know that no law regulating any natural resource should be gender blind. This analysis is very ambitious. We collect a lot of information, and it can be scaled up and applied in many ways. In the long term, like our other tenure tracking analyses, we will update the analysis to cover more countries, thereby tracking legislative progress and setbacks over time. We will also create follow-up analyses that take a deeper dive into specific elements of the methodology. We will strategically disseminate the analysis to increase acceptance of the concept of community-based freshwater tenure, foster data-driven advocacy, and influence policy decisions and international guidance on community resource tenure. We'll develop specific tools that disseminate our data for particular stakeholders so they can promote community freshwater rights within their frames of reference and influence. And we'll also build bridges and foster collaboration among stakeholders working in the water, forest, land, gender, and other related sectors. We're very, very excited about this work, and I'm happy to share it with you today and look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Now we turn to our judges to ask the presenters a few very short comments or questions. Let me first, since last time we went from the other way, let's first let me turn to Dirk to start off, please.
Thank you very much.
Can you hold the microphone?
One question each to the presenters. Thank you very much for the inspiring presentations. So first to Kenneth Aro. My question would be, you're talking about, as part of your project, the administration of survey instruments to determine the public opinion. How are you going to do that?
Yeah, the survey, like I stated in the presentation, is one of the models. Like we have the experimental model, we also have the survey instrument. Now we're going to, part of the reconnaissance survey that will be undertaken at the commencement of the study will actually involve development of a questionnaire, a structured questionnaire, and then that structured questionnaire will be done in such a way to include to make sure that we have various components of it that reflect gender-based just social inclusion, because we wouldn't want to deny any person or respondents the opportunity of giving us information about the perception of consuming sachet water and possibly the discernible health effects that they are experiencing as a result of that. Then we will make sure that that is why it's called structured. It's structured in such a way that we have components for the state of origin, the ethnicity, and also issue that has to do with health, and then occupational disposition. So all these things will be done so that we'll get a fair balance of the society in a way as to reflect social inclusion in what we're going to do. And that will actually create room for that human rights-based component in the approach.
Thank you very much. The next question goes out to Eva Manzano. If I understand you correctly, you will help the Colombian government to implement Decree 1898. That's part of, I think, what you, if I understood correctly, will do, which seems to advocate alternative solutions. My question would be, whether that decree endorses the human rights approach, which means you will also endorse it when helping to implement. And secondly, whether I imagine the situation correctly by saying, so the Colombian government has approached you and they said that Decree 1898 requires them to do certain things, but they don't have the resources and the money to do so, so you're asking you to do it. And then it would be interesting to learn then whether they are also asking you to, if I may say this quite directly, to then get external funding to help the Colombian government to implement a requirement that they already have. Sorry to be maybe a bit blunt, but just to understand the situation. And the third question goes to Stephanie Keen. This is very exciting for me, the topic also as the others. Have you thought to what extent does your model also include local laws? If you think about legal pluralism and the fact that some of those indigenous communities may have their own understanding of how nature and water interact with the law. And I understand that your approach wants to look at these particular situations. To what extent is it able to do so? And then wouldn't it depend more on what the very local and specific conditions and the local understanding of the law and how are you integrating that into your model?
Should I go first? Thank you for the question. Let me clarify a little bit, because when they put together this Decree 1898, they recognized the possibility of implementing these solutions, which before it wasn't on their, it wasn't regulated. And within that policy, they also include an area that says we need to keep providing technical assistance to communities, because now it's not that us as the government are going to come with the infrastructure. We're going to provide an initial solution, but because they are household water treatment technologies that have like a lifespan or 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, then it's up to the communities to
proper maintain and change those technologies over time. So the technical and the policy was there. The problem is like when they started thinking about how to put it into practice, they realized that, first of all, they were lacking internal capacity in understanding what were these solutions and how to implement them successfully. Because in Colombia, there has been a lot of presence of these options, but there has been the implementation way more linked to emergency response, like there has been a flooding, a displacement, but not as a middle-term, longer-term solution. So they realized that they were like every day almost coming people to their ministry office, knocking at the door, promoting X technology, and they really didn't know if it was appropriate for a certain context, so they need that technical assistance, and then also they needed support on how to implement it in a way that is sustainable. So that's where we as COTS can provide that technical advice, but it's not up to us to implement it. It will be the local offices of the government that will be implementing these type of solutions with their own internal budgets. The problem is also that there is normally budget for the infrastructure component, but the software component is still the question that they haven't found the money to do so. So we're here to help, but we also need to find where the money is going to come from.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, Stephanie, a short response, please. No.
Thanks for your question. Several thoughts in response. First, there are, like I said, many countries have multiple CWTRs. What our analysis allows us to do is to capture a very specific local situation of indigenous peoples and local communities and to say what their specific rights are. And that includes whether their specific customary rights are legally recognized in formal law. Second, what you can do with this analysis, and what we're actually planning on doing in a pilot exercise next year in Liberia, is to distill the findings into a form that is most resonant and usable for local communities so that they can then say, this is what my customary right is, this is how we use freshwater resources, and these are the gaps between what the law says and what I say my rights are, and what they have been for generations and generations to come. So this is something that can be used easily for a number of advocacy goals that are very locally driven.
Thank you. So now let me turn to Murray to ask a few questions.
Sure, I'll just take time to ask two quick questions. Firstly, for Eva, I took from your presentation at the beginning, you talked about household water treatment interventions where users themselves could treat the water and protect themselves from bad quality water. However, as your presentation went on, I wasn't quite sure what type of technologies you were actually considering. And so just to clarify, are you talking about household water treatment, or are you actually talking about larger scale infrastructure to address the water quality issue? Then my second question is for Kenneth. My understanding from what you presented was you want to identify if the sachets themselves are safe in terms of the quality of the product and its interaction with the water, and then the impact of the storage systems. My question is, once you've identified potential problems there and you've changed the regulations, what effect will that actually have when you're looking at the relationship between regulations in Nigeria and levels of enforcement? Do you think changing the regulation will actually result in any change in reality on the ground? Those are my two questions. Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Yeah, when we're looking at storing the water at different keeping the sachet water at different storage conditions, we looked at storing it at room temperature. We're also looking at exposing them to sunlight. Because of space constraint that most producers usually encounter, so they don't usually have enough space, so most of them are actually left in the open with the direct sunlight hitting on the nylons. Now, we're trying to determine the relationship between the effect of sunlight as one of the storage conditions, and also the other one, which is at room temperature. Now, Now, if we're able to come up with a very good relationship between what is actually causing that deterioration, because we realized from research that have been conducted in the past that some of the samples that are kept at room temperature, exposed to sunlight, deteriorated faster than those ones that are kept at room temperature. Now, we are trying to find out the relationship between sunlight and what is actually causing this. So that is why we are trying to find out from the, carrying out chemical analysis of or characterization of the nylons to find out if through pore size characterization and porosity, if there are some information that we can get to suggest that there could be migrating contaminating agents when the temperature rises. Now, if we're able to pull through with this process at the end of the pilot program, then we will be able to be making an informed recommendations which will be used for policy recommendation. And if we're able to push that further, that can actually inform regulation revision. And then we know fully well that just as most countries are not taking serious commitment in terms of providing access to water and sanitation, so we will continue through our advocacy and then all the necessary sensitization processes that we can do, either using NGOs in order to drive home this message to government on the need to actually revise the regulation on the acceptable method of storing this sachet water in order to guarantee safety of consumers. Thank you.
Thank you. Eva.
Thanks for your question. So in this case, we're talking about household water treatment as a solution, not as the only solution. We recognize that pipe system and centralized systems are needed and are the best option, but household water treatment can be a complementary solution when in two cases. First of all, in those cases where the existing systems are not reliable, you can trust on them because there is not good treatment or they are cut off or things like that, or because there needs to be some transportation. So there are studies that prove that water gets contaminated again. So to make sure that the water people are drinking are safe, putting that treatment at the point of consumption is important. Also, because there are places where they're not going to have a centralized system, so that will be an alternative when you have a well or rainwater to make sure that you have a safe drinking water at the end. And in terms of which particular technologies we promote, the fact is like we do not promote any particular technology. What we do is help the institutions in the government and NGOs to identify what are the local conditions, what are the water characteristics, and based on that, trying to choose what will be the most applicable technologies for their particular context.
Thank you very much. Now, let me turn to Raya.
Okay, so I'll be very fast because most of the questions I had were already asked, but I have a question to the case in Nairobi. I was wondering, because the problem comes from the groundwater and river pollution, and so is there some governmental measures to try to prevent or reduce this pollution, so you also solve the need to use these water sachets for the people? And I have a question for Stephanie. I was wondering, because as I understood, your study for the moment was only a desk study, so you were using the laws to see how the laws are recognizing the rights of the communities. But what about communities existing and having customary laws and habits that are not recognized by a law? How do you make the link with this, or what's happening? And are the national laws recognizing the human right to water not enough to advocate for the implementation of the human right to water for the members of the communities individually? Do you need to have this right also? You need to advocate for the right of the community itself, or advocating also using an existing recognized law, either in the constitution or in the water law or whatever, to advocate for the human right to water of the individuals, and then it will be for the community.
Before you respond, because of the time constraints, let me open just 2 questions from the floor. Then we will have the final round of responses from the panel. Is there anybody who would like to ask any question to the panel? Yes. Can we get a microphone? Oh, you have a microphone, yes.
Hi, my name is Hisai Saito. I'm a representative of educational NGO for sustainability called Juventum. And I have a question to Ms. Eva Manzano. And from your presentation, I took it that it's good to try to have a standard to be universal, but a solution to be locally contextualized. And I completely agree with that. And from your, then you seem to have a very concrete situation and approach in mind. And in your observation so far, in your situation, what is acceptable? Because when you see the water, whether that is toxic or just turbid and brown and bad taste, and we don't know the situation in Colombia. So if you can explain what is the status like? Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. One more question, anybody? Okay, gentleman in the back.
My question is for the tenure presentation. So my name is Peter Oxen. I'm from WIPO Green here in the house. Now, the tenure debate on water is extremely complex, of course, because some situations it'll be highly regulated, and other situations probably not at all. But there are some there's a very old and very thorough debate on land tenure, of course, which I'm sure you know very well, about regulated commons, unregulated commons, customary systems, and community management of land. So as land, as I saw on one of your slides, or from one of your conclusions, is also very limited or very linked to the extraction and where you use the water also. So I was wondering, from the work that you do, how much could you actually base it on this debate that has been going on in land tenure in order to expand that to water, or maybe build on these initiatives, of which there has been many in many countries, in order to make tenure reforms, and then building on the land reforms, and then expand that into associated water resources. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So now let me turn to the presenters for final response. 1 minute each. Who would like to start? Okay, Kenneth. Oh, Stephanie.
Just to respond to your question, like I said in my presentation, we have 4 existing tenure tracking databases, global databases tracking qualitative and quantitative data on the status of land and forest tenure for communities. And our absolute aim is to build upon the power of community land tenure and to link this to the potential power of community freshwater tenure. Many of the community-based water tenure regimes that we've identified because of the land-water nexus, there are actual corresponding tenure regimes on the land and forest side. And so what we will now have for many of the countries featured in our database is a very comprehensive set of data that's interlinked, that speaks to each other, and that covers community freshwater rights, community land rights, community forest rights, and the specific rights of indigenous and rural women. So yes, that is part of our objective, and we're very excited to be a stronger participant in tenure-oriented discourse going forward. Rhea, you asked, what if laws don't recognize customary rights? If that's the case, that will be portrayed in our findings table. You'll be able to look and see which community-based water tenure regimes do include customary water rights under the law and which do not. And then communities can use that information to advocate for the recognition of their customary freshwater rights. You also asked basically whether or not individual rights are enough. And certainly I would say with respect to indigenous peoples and local communities that hold rights collectively, they're not enough. unfortunately. It's wonderful that most countries recognize the human right to water under their national laws, but we see so many procedural requirements for even domestic use, for livelihood uses. And the reality is that communities hold resources as a community, collectively. So they are not able to actually effectuate their customary uses and to exercise the human right to water and sanitation if those rights that are collective, are community-based, are not also recognized.
Yeah, trying to respond to the question, where is the pollution coming into the sachet water? Yes, we do know, yes, that water, like if you've gone through my presentation, you notice that at a point I gave the background on the international standards. We have WHO standards that should actually should be there in order for water to meet that requirement for quality purposes. Now, we have seen that inside that sachet water, when you carry out your total heterotrophic bacteria count, you are expected to have the maximum limit that WHO has set there should be 1 × 10⁻², colony forming unit per mil. Now, what that means is that water can actually exist in that form in a situation where you can have some organisms in them. And then don't forget, too, that there are some other physiochemical properties that may be inherent inside that water, which, of course, if you now subject them to certain storage conditions, because of the changes in the atmospheric weather conditions, it could actually accentuate some of those components to come up or to go down. Now, if you have them in such a manner that you carry out analysis and then they comply with WHO standard, which is 1 × 10⁻², colony forming unit per mil, then it means that that water is good. And it has also passed through some form of sterilization techniques. But of course, there's some water, in looking at the coliform count, it is expected that there should be no presence of Escherichia coli inside that water for it to meet that quality requirement. Then, before we carry out that analysis, we will also need to do this pre-storage analysis to be able to establish the baseline before we can proceed. Now, if that same coliform level shouldn't also be more than 3, it shouldn't be more than 3. When you analyze 100 mils of water, that coliform should not exceed 3. At least if it should, let it not pass 4 colony forming unit per 100 mil. So that is why you may definitely have to see some organisms in the water. It doesn't necessarily mean that that reflects bad quality water. It could be in a state where it will still comply with WHO requirements. And then, but of course, it will be guided by the fact that a baseline has been established before commencing your study, so that at the end of the day, you know whether is it increasing or is it decreasing. But of course, based on some other components in the water, which are some maybe physiochemical in nature, when there are variations in temperature and then pressure and other physicochemical properties, there may be some variations in the bacterial load. Thank you.
Thank you. Take the other microphone.
Regarding your question about water quality, where is the situation in Colombia and what is the minimum, I feel like the situation in terms of water quality in Colombia, it doesn't change compared to other countries, at least as far as I've seen. You find microbiological being a main concern. In some areas of the country, chemical contamination is also significant due to mining and other industrial activities. There are even parts of the country where salt is a huge problem. So based on that, depending on the area you work in, you need to look at what solutions you have. It's obvious that if you're looking at low-cost technologies, there are some situations like high concentrations of salt that are very hard to remove with simple technologies. But even like with reverse osmosis systems are difficult to applicate in those contexts because are hard to maintain, etc. So there are cases that your best option in terms of water, your inner water is probably look for an alternative water source, like rainwater potentially. But in terms of the quality of water you're looking for at the end, and so people are drinking that water, you're looking at the standards of the country or the most close to that at least microbiological is 0 and people can drink that water, right? Because you can get potentially at the same levels as a centralized system, but knowing at the same time that centralized systems don't always meet the standards either. So we need to be realistic, trying to meet as best as we can the standards marked by the country. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have heard 3 very different presentations on the projects. One on building scientific evidence on water quality, and one focusing on local capacity building, and another on legal analysis. But all 3 of them share something in common, that they're all looking at key elements of human rights to water sanitations. And when it comes to indigenous people, they have a special feature that there has to be a strong focus on self-determination, free and informed consent, which means that you really need to focus on the ground-up local actions and looking at specificity and involving the people into the solutions and listening to them, which all of you have been addressed. So I don't envy the task of the judges, but regardless of the outcome, I wish you all in continuing your excellent work, and please give a round of applause to the presentators.
Thank you very much to our presenters, judges, and our moderator, Rio. The theme for our next session is refugees and migrants. Our moderator is Rakia Turner from Waterlex.
Good morning. We're in the home stretch here, so just bear with us as we I'd like to go ahead and call the next presenters to the stage. Please take your seats. But to just set the stage as we begin this session dedicated to refugees and migrants, I'd like to express that we have an explicit call in the SDGs for the facilitation of orderly, safe, and responsible migration and mobility of people. Just as the 2030 Agenda is applicable to all countries, developing and developed alike, we see the impact of displacement affecting all corners of the globe. This includes the issue of access to water and sanitation, where in 2018 we saw multiple joint statements on this matter from UN Special Rapporteurs, such as the call on the government of France to provide safe drinking water and sanitation services for migrant and asylum seekers who were living in tents without toilets and washing themselves in polluted rivers or lakes. Or the call in relation to the migrant caravan from Central America destined to the United States, confirming that states have to take all necessary measures to ensure the human rights to migrants traveling in caravans are fully protected as they confront humanitarian challenges, such as those linked to serious shortages of water and sanitation, among others. In our quest to leave no one behind, we should also recall that the human rights to water and sanitation is a right of everyone without discrimination. A right to be realized and protected regardless of one's status as refugee or migrant. But we also have to remember, in fact, it's exactly this status which calls for special attention to be given to ensure their access to water and sanitation under international human rights law. Beyond the identification as refugee or migrant, many displaced persons find their predicament is further exacerbated on account of them belonging to a marginalized group. Thus, it's important in the human rights context not to view refugees as a homogeneous group. We have to make sure, as we seek to leave no one behind, that we must look to the special needs of subgroups such as refugee and migrant women and girls. Often displaced persons find themselves in areas already experiencing fragility, which may stem from tenuous security and conflict areas or existing environmental degradation, such as water scarcity. All of this which serves to spur conflict over resources between the population of concern and the host communities. Given the protracted nature of many situations of displacement, generating new and innovative technologies is not only an opportunity to find sustainable solutions for water access for refugees and migrants, but it's also an opportunity to alleviate existing pressures and challenges of resource access in host communities. As well, it's an opportunity to alter their viewpoint and have them see the influx of migrants or refugees as one that can be correlated to positive development of infrastructure and resources. So with this idea of procuring innovation for access to safe water and sanitation in relation to displaced persons, we have two dynamic presentations this morning that touch upon these topics of special needs of migrant women and girls, as well as the benefits of utilizing innovation for water use in areas of hosting refugees. We will continue to have the presentations consecutively and then open it up for questions by the judges and the audience. So first up, we have Dr. Nidhi Nagabatala. Dr. Nagabatala is a natural systems science specialist and a geospatial analyst with nearly 20 years of research and work experience. She's currently program officer at the United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment, and Health, and an adjunct professor of the School of Geography and Earth Science at McMaster University in Ontario, Canada. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. And thank you, Waterlex, for providing us the stage to talk about this new and emerging water migration nexus. And I'm very delighted to talk about our collaborative initiative with the government of DRC, the initiative which we haven't launched but will be launching on the World Water Day. What is our offshoot of that? And with 1 year of deliberations on how to prioritize the water, energy, food nexus, we thought that missing out on gender in this conflict-ridden area would be a big oversight. And with that understanding, we thought of expanding our collaborations and leveraging some more fund to insert and embed gender in our activities, which are about to start. And so I'm representing a team of 3 to begin with. Dr. Raphael is heading the Congo Basin Water Resource Center, CREBA, and University of Kinshasa, and Pantia Porman is a researcher working jointly from McMaster University, expert in public health and gender, working with both the institutions, UNUNWA and Caribao. So a sort of a good collaborative co-development initiative. And maybe I can manage my own. A bit of a context on the problem identification. In terms of diagnosis, I mean, it is common knowledge that the Central African region, specifically DRC, is dealing with a suite of problems. Human security is big on the international development discourse, stabilizing populations, bringing them to safety, but amid all this, WASH issues is something that's also kind of showing up high in the list of tasks to do, and gaps and needs to be taken into account as the international development agencies are trying to follow and adapt a LRRD approach, which is a sort of a new thinking, linking relief and rehab with development. And in terms, as Congo River Basin is the largest, one of the largest in the sub-Saharan Africa, provisioning around 77 million people. The state of affairs in WASH is not so bright. 2 among 5 people don't have access to basic water needs, and 1 among 5 to basic sanitation. While our umbrella project will be looking into the big nexus of gender, water, climate, conflict, and migration, that of course, through a larger funding source through Government of Canada International Affairs, we are also trying to build a parallel line of intervention to gender-related development planning, building a community of practice, trying to build an advocacy, and also kind of build a database and knowledge base to see that things go hand in hand along with policy reforms in the water sector, in climate change adaptation, and conflict resolution. So gender and migration is also pretty much part of this larger equation. And why do I say so? Because water-related crises and conflicts are now listed among the main drivers of human displacement in the region. And I'll not go into details, happy to discuss in a parallel discussion. So what do we plan to do here is to see that we have a gender-focused activities on WASH and MHM, which we do see as a basic sort of a basic ingredient in United Nations Resolution 64-92, the human rights to water and sanitation, and is often overlooked when the main issue in hand is human security, conflict resolution, and bringing back peace. So with that background, we are trying to use existing we are not going to create more knowledge, data, and information, but we are going to aggregate and package them for knowledge building, capacity development, and dissemination through the community of practice that will be established by the larger umbrella project. So the part 1 is knowledge synthesis, which is already ongoing, but will focus on MHM and WASH, given the funding leveraging other financial sources, perhaps through this intervention or others. And then we'll package it into a different kind of modules. And as part 2 of that, this is more of a kind of a knowledge synthesis part, and part 2 is a kit. In this kit, we are going to disseminate this kit through an e-learning interface. And this e-learning interface is a mixed tool approach, where we already have in plan to have series of MOOCs, webinars, stakeholder consultations on ground with CBOs, community-based organizations. And we want to have a sort of a multi-phased e-learning module, which is meant for a variety of stakeholders. So a complex or a more policy-oriented taught or training of the training taught one for the policy stakeholders, and for the ground level stakeholders about techniques, innovations in WASH and MHM that can be easily scaled, that can be easily implemented and adopted. I'll give a very specific example in here. So we are also negotiating on the sidelines a partnership with a social entrepreneurship initiative in Africa, AfriPads. So they will help us in using some new innovative techniques in MHM. This is one example, but there are several other discussions in parallel going on, wherein we can source data, we can source information, and we can source existing knowledge to build up this knowledge dissemination activity. The collaborations with stakeholder is key to this. As a foreign agency, as a UN agency, we do have some advantages, but we want local ownership, we want co-development, and we want long-term sustainability. So we already have a set of researchers from University of Kinshasa, public health researchers, a hydrologist, and social scientists to form a group who will then see how do we package our product, what sensitivities apply in terms of cultural, linguistics, and so on and so forth. And very overarching to this intent, to this activity, this proposal is our prime target to see that we are able to influence implementation of sustainable development goals. And given that WASH and MHM primarily falls into the bucket of SDG 6, but seeing the response that we got on SDG 6 synthesis report lately, we need to take into account that WASH and MHM moves beyond the domain of SDG 6. We are able to marry it with SDG 5, SDG 3, SDG 11, SDG 16 on partnerships, and perhaps SDG 17 on collaborations. So I think handling MHM and WASH issues in isolation will not go a long way. This is our sort of understanding that we're going to move on with. We'll embed this thinking also in the teaching or learning modules that we'll develop. And we are not, in terms of cultural sensitivities, we recognized after 1 year of linking with the stakeholders on ground, given the security, given the sensitive situation in the region, we are supposed to package our content in a very, very nuanced manner, to be able to use that terminology, to be able to use those words that are able, that are neutral, that helps in consensus building, but not in provocation. So maybe instead of saying that using the terminologies like sex, disaggregated data collection, we are approaching it with like building community resilience, where each stakeholder has a perceptive mapping, or maybe just doing a bit of a thinking on how to present this very sensitive issue in a conflict-ridden area. And we are being held by a series of researchers who specialize in gender knowledge, and we are partnering with the UNESCO group on the water and gender, using their water and gender toolkit. So in terms of results, we'll have a comprehensive database on what kind of technologies, innovative tools do exist. We are going to put them into a database, which will then distribute to stakeholders. And then we are also going to have a small atlas on visualizing this using GIS tools. So we can study where the stakeholders can use that as a policy support tool in identifying gaps and needs. Where should funds be channelized, which area, which communities, or which stakeholder groups are more vulnerable than others. Based on that, we'll try to prototype an e-learning module with 3 selected communities, one in the one in using a basin scale thinking, one in the upstream, one in downstream. Those communities are selected in the order that they have a sort of a distributed population, mainstream population, and migratory population. And 1/3 community will be Maboro pastoralist, that's like transhumans that move along the Congo basin with their livestock and along the water sources. So when droughts are persisting, then water sources are drying up, they are changing their cultural migration routes, which is causing conflict with mainstream population. So we are going to identify our communities that are representative, and long-term follow-up will be carried out by the Umbrella Project in terms of seeing that if we have good outcomes and impact indicators to measure knowledge transfer, and how have we influenced WASH and gender-related goals and targets. And this is pretty much that we all know them by heart now. So this is primarily our approach to at least influence these set of targets, but as we go and learn, we can always expand our area of influence. Well, in terms of scaling up, this was a very interesting thinking when we were putting this slide together. We do reckon that this is a complex issue, especially with migratory populations. They are moving across boundaries which transcend beyond national borders. So in terms of provisioning them with WASH and MHM services, it needs to be across a transboundary approach or some kind of a thinking that goes beyond the national territorial thinking. And we are trying to leverage some sort of some impact from the upsurge of mobile technology in the region, and how this mobile technology is being used by different international development agencies, either for fund distribution or tracking the routes of migrations per se. So maybe we on a long term, by using this e-learning module as a sample or an experience, we plan to generate an app at least for people who are on the grid. And through the larger impact, we plan to at least target influencing 5 million people around and across the basin in 3 countries. This is over 3 years, but this 6 months, if we focus on this gender-based activity, it gives us a reference to scale it, maybe leveraging other sources of funding in the future. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you for that enlightening presentation. Next, we have Ms. Bercho Yazici. She is an environmental engineer by profession with 5 years of experience in national and international projects focusing on river basin management and water resources and wastewater management. She now serves as an expert at the Turkish Water Institute and will present gray water reuse for crop production in temporary accommodation centers.
Thank you very much. Well, I work at Turkish Water Institute, which is a governmental institute under the Ministry of Forestry and Agriculture in Turkey. Before I start, I would like to thank for the opportunity including me here and to present my case at the summit. So as the title indicates, my case is on grey water reuse for irrigation. So here you can see a map that is familiar to all of us. Certain parts of the world experience either physical or economic water scarcity, or both. And actually, the number is 3.6 billion by now, and this number is expected to rise by 1 to 2 billion in 2050. And we know that most of these countries are either least developed or developing countries, and they consume 70 to 80% of their freshwater resources for irrigation. So in order to conserve the quality and quantity of these water resources, we need to widely apply fit-for-purpose reuse as it provides a reliable and cost-effective solution to meet the growing demands. And in that sense, grey water reuse is an alternative because it requires minimal treatment and it can be used also for irrigation. So the aim of my project is to apply grey water reuse in a temporary accommodation center in Turkey by involving refugees, which is a very vulnerable group, as you can imagine, and so that they gain knowledge and experience in using an alternative source of water for irrigation. So here you can see the list of activities within the project time. First of all, we will of course get the necessary permissions from the Ministry of Interior of Turkey, which is the responsible body for the safety of temporary protection centers. So once the TRC is selected, we will conduct an analysis on biological, physical, and chemical characteristics of grey water sources within the facility, which are wash basin, sinks, and showers, to see if these sources are fit to use for irrigation. And in parallel, we will select the plants, and we will also determine the planting schedule with local experts. So following that, we will provide a basic training on water sanitation and hygiene. This deemed necessary because we have information that the refugees that are residing currently in temporary accommodation centers have limited knowledge on WASH too. So we thought that it's better to provide them with the basics of WASH at first. So this will be done with the contributions of International Agricultural Cooperation Organization, which is actually an NGO. And they mainly implement agricultural and livestock projects inside Syria, in liberated areas actually, with the help of local experts and engineers. So this is a group that is also legally registered in Turkey, and we thought that including them to the project will provide huge support to us, not only in preparing the training materials, but also in facilitating the communication with the refugees. So between months 4 and 6, we will construct the grey water pipeline and add an oil and grease separator and a basic filtration unit if deemed necessary. And we will finally construct the raised bed to plant the crops in it. So following that, we will provide the second training to the refugees, which will be on basics of greywater use and crop growth with greywater. And finally, we will observe the efficiency of greywater use for plant growth and define the bottlenecks, and also observe the perception towards use of greywater reuse by refugees before and after trainings are provided. And then all of these will be gathered in an outcome report. So with regards to activities and with regards to human rights to water and sanitation, this project offers greywater reuse as an alternative source of water. So in that sense, it suggests a simple solution or a simple step to close the water cycle gap, and thereby addresses the availability, acceptability, affordability, and quality issues within human rights, because it will reduce the amount of wastewater going to the water bodies, and people will be able to use less water for irrigation that's coming from the tap. So freshwater resources will be protected as well. But in addition to that, we are considering to engage stakeholders from the outset of the project, especially refugees. And our main aim is to add value to them through trainings on wash and reuse, but they will be also able to observe the crop growth and all of the installation processes as well while we are conducting the research. So they will be actually involved at each process, and they can actually learn from this process, and once they go back their home, they can actually apply it. So in addition to field research, we will also conduct some desk research investigating the deficiencies and barriers in current legislations to find out why greywater reuse is not widely applied. And our aim is to come up with some solutions to facilitate extensive use of greywater. So finally, the results. Well, we will not only, as I said before, we will not only focus on technical aspects of greywater reuse within the project, but also on social acceptance. With regards to technical results, we will first of all identify if greywater is really qualified to use for irrigation, and how can we improve its quality so that it can be efficiently applied for irrigation. We will of course check the soil quality before and after water is applied. One of the aims of this project is, maybe I should return back to the previous slide. On the right hand side you can see a small diagram what I'm trying to achieve with this project. So water will come from different sources to the raised beds, and I am planning to divide the raised bed into two. So on one side, I will only irrigate the crops with on the greywater, and on the other side, I will alternate it with fresh water. Because as I was doing my desk research, I have found out that some of the chemicals can interfere with soil quality in the end. So it will be wise to observe what's happening in both cases. So with regards to social acceptance of greywater reuse, we will observe perception towards use of greywater by getting feedback from refugees. And this will be done before and after the trainings, so we can have some surveys face-to-face. And also, as I mentioned before, we will scrutinize current policies on water reuse to define the deficiencies and barriers. So again, stakeholder engagement is key to the success of this project, because we need their feedback in order to come up with an efficiently applicable model for greywater reuse in the end. So to scale this project up, well, we can expand the study to rural communities actually. in least developed and developing countries by studying low-cost greywater reuse applications, such as building lagoons or using solar disinfection, and trying to achieve this as feasible as we can do, so without pump use and so on. And we can also study, apart from irrigation purposes, we can study if it can be used for toilet flushing as well, or other purposes as well. So the main aim here is to come up with tailor-made solutions that can meet the needs of each community. So we can extend the study eventually from greywater use to rainwater harvesting in areas where no water is available, and finally to reuse of treated wastewater as well. That will be all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm going to ask the judges to choose the top burning question you have and ask it, and time permitting, we'll allow for further. But starting with Raya, please.
Okay, two quick questions. For the first presenter on the Congo case, I didn't understand who you want to address with your e-model, and I didn't understand how is the kit you're going to develop will improve the WASH and MHM condition of the migrants. And perhaps I ask the second question. I was wondering if the refugees are already undertaking crop production, or is it a new activity you would like to create for them? Then I was surprised in your last slide, you're saying you will expand from greywater use to rainwater harvesting and then to treated wastewater, because rainwater harvesting is already accepted, very much accepted, and I know from communities in the Middle East it existed traditionally, so I think it comes first before greywater reuse. When there's no need to convince communities to rainwater harvesting, it's already in there.
Okay, Dr. Nabalata.
Okay, so the thing is that we want to address the communities, but we will first have to identify champions. So first we'll build that community of practice of champions. They go back to the community and they will talk to the migrant communities, because there are sensitivities that apply, and they will be the leaders who will carry the messaging on the ground. But we'll train them on the basics of what is feasible, what are the technologies, what is the understanding, what are the kind of rights, and what are the kind of the human right dimension in WASH and MHM. So basically, we will be training the community health managers or leaders and associated stakeholders at the community level, and they go and do the rest on the ground directly with the migrant communities. That's how that model came from the ground, so that we have to follow it.
Thank you for your question. The application of greywater reuse in temporary protection centers in Turkey is not applied at all. This will be a first case if I get the project. But there is a greenhouse in one of the provinces in Turkey, so near a protection center, they have built actually a greenhouse where refugees can grow crops, but not on greywater, with fresh water. On your second question, I was not trying to convince people on using rainwater harvesting. These technologies are already there. Greywater reuse is there, rainwater harvesting is there, and treated wastewater is already being reused in some of the countries, and most of the industries actually apply these kind of processes. But my aim is to apply these processes widely, worldwide, especially in least developed and developing countries, so that we can actually protect freshwater resources, because we use most of the water in household bases, and we lose this water to waste. Actually, greywater is mixed with black water, and when you mix them, you have to treat a huge amount of wastewater daily. So what I'm trying to achieve here is to separate black water from greywater, and to come up with maybe policies that can support this. and actually widely apply grey water use worldwide.
Murray?
Sure. Just one question here on the grey water reuse. I think you had a very well thought through presentation there, but one thing I was missing was on the crop production. Have you given some thinking to the type of crops that you would produce? And then in terms of the scale up, I would have thought the first step for scale up would be within the refugee camps in Turkey before going broadly elsewhere. Thanks.
Okay, with regards to the crops that's to be grown with grey water, we know grey water is quite alkaline, so the soil will get alkaline, so we need to grow crops that are persistent to alkaline water. So mainly we can grow shrubs like strawberries, but another important part here is that they shouldn't touch the ground, so that they shouldn't get contaminated with grey water, just in case anything happens with regards to health issues. And your second question was? I'm sorry. Next step. Well, yes, of course we can apply it widely in Turkey to other temporary protection centers, but the cases, they are temporary. So last year we had over 20 temporary accommodation centers within Turkey, but this year the number dropped to 13. So maybe we can apply it to other countries in refugee camps, but I don't know if it would be feasible to apply it widely in Turkey.
And Dirk.
Very much. First question goes to Nidhi Nagar-Butler. In your project outline, when being asked about the human rights approach in your project, you quite extensively talked about SDG 5 and 6. My question is, what is your understanding about the relationship of the human right to water and SDG 6? The second question goes to Boko Ziki, and the question is, and you're mentioning in your outline that Turkey holds the largest number of refugees in the world with over 3.9 million. So this is, of course, a challenge in itself. Yet, my question would be, to what extent, when you write about the very limited awareness, I hope I quote it correctly, and knowledge of refugees with regard to water and wastewater management, so to speak, damaging of water taps, dumping of large objects into sewers, etc., and that education should be provided, an opportunity to convey and apply their learnings once they return to their home country. Then my question is, to what extent is this, do you think, and from your observation and your empirical work, a lack of knowledge and training on the one hand, and to what extent do you think it might be due to lack of certain deficiencies in the refugee camps, which should first and primarily be remedied in terms of the way they are equipped and, this is there. And secondly, when people go back from war-torn societies like Syria, and they come back hoping that they will only come back once the situation is more to what it was before they fled, where they may need some of the training, but maybe some of it not, because depending if you live in a big city and, if the things have work again, then, well, I would probably not know a lot about these things, and I may not need it then once you go back in that situation. So that relationship, that would be very interesting for me to learn more about. Thanks.
I'm going to start with just saying that SDG 6 and Resolution 64, sorry about the number, human rights to water and sanitation are complementary. In fact, a lot of underlying thinking in SDG 6 is derived from it. It encompasses, the human rights resolution encompasses indigenous aspects, it encompasses gender aspects to a fair extent, if I may, and it encompasses qualitative and quantitative indicators about how much water should be delivered, the quality of water, very, very specifically. So in the way I think it's very mutually enforcing both these global thinking paradigms. Coming back to SDG, the human rights resolution, is also, if I may take the advantage of saying legally binding, since it's a resolution, to a good extent is legally binding, but some countries have done better than others in embedding and inserting it in their water laws. In DRC, contextualizing the information to DRC, they started initiating a new water law for contemporary water problems and crises in 2007. 10 years down the lane, they have, in 2017, they finally finalized it. And I think it does reflect a bit upon human rights to water and sanitation, and also SDG 6. So it's a very good time to influence a joint thinking into policy reforms, not just in the water sector, but also on the sectors that apply in that bigger nexus of water, climate change adaptation, and gender. So as a UN agency, our thing is to kind of lobby for a larger policy reform, but work in tandem with local and regional researchers, so they become our voice. And so I think these projects are primarily the trigger and a kind of they chart the pathway to bring that larger change and transformative change. I would rather say that in a nutshell.
It's true that around 3.6 million refugees are currently residing in Turkey, but only 200,000 of them resides in temporary accommodation centers. So the number is quite low who are residing in accommodation centers. So I don't have the exact data for the refugees that are in temporary protection centers, but I believe that they come from a very poor background. So once they return back, it might be possible that they are going back to rural areas as well. So I thought it might be useful to provide all the data.
Okay, thank you. So in the interest of time, we'll take 2 questions from the audience. Do we have any questions? Yes, sir.
Okay. Regarding the project with the greywater reuse, I was wondering if you are planning some kind of training during the operation of the system regarding contamination issues, if there is any identification of pipes saying, like, for example, not drinking water, things that, like, of that sort that are kind of standard in this type of systems, because if we think at a longer term, things we could get many sources of possible contamination. So, have you thought of anything regarding that? And as well, is going to be any water quality control, any exam and analysis or anything? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Well, yes, of course, we are thinking of surveying the water quality throughout the whole project, as well as soil quality. But we are not thinking of including them in the training that we are going to provide to the refugees, because it will be too much to bother them with. So we will just provide them with the basics, make the training as simple as possible so that they can understand the really basics of greywater reuse. But on the other side, on the technical side, we will, of course, monitor the results.
Yes.
Hello, this is to Ms. Yazgi. Correct me if I'm wrong, you work for some kind of governmental institutes in Turkey. The question is, the Turkish government, and I'm not trying to talk politics here, technology and techniques, the Turkish government had already prepared a huge piece of land before 2011, and prepared so many things. So the question is why they had waited all this time try to use the grey water. And if you say most of the people are from rural areas, and as we know that Syria has always been a sufficient feeding country for its own people, so these people are professional farmers, why not they just, instead of being in a tent, use their energy to feed themselves in the right way, knowing that Turkey has taken the water of the Tigris and the Euphrates from everybody down the stream, and they have plenty of water. So it seems that your step, even though it's appreciable in the technical side of using grey water, but it's a little bit too much late, like it's too much late to repair the damage.
Well, thanks for the question. Within the temporary protection centers, they already have membrane filtration units to treat their wastewater, so they don't actually need anything else. But what we are trying to do here is to provide a very vulnerable group some training so that they can actually apply them once they return back home. So the idea was that.
Okay, so at the moment we've run out of time, so apologies for that. But thank you so much for these enlightening presentations, and thank you to all the presenters this morning for the informative presentations and the contributions for the audience. And so we wish you a good lunch, and I give the floor back to Desmond.
Thank you. Thank you to our presenters and judges and our moderator, Rukia. Lunch is available in the cafeteria. Everybody enjoyed my directions to the cafeteria yesterday, so I'm going to do it again. So the directions to the cafeteria: downstairs, past the toilets, out the back door, turn right. You will find an elevator with a little sign on it that says press 0 to go to the cafeteria. That's how you get to the cafeteria. Thank you. Good question. If we could be back at, say, 1:25 for our 1:30 start. So we're going to restart at 1:30. Thank you.